So the first step in cooking any meal is to make sure your hands are clean. But I've done that before we started cooking today, so I was going to move on to the second step, which is going to be to skin our onion. We want to make sure there's no roots or skin on the onion because no one likes eating those parts. Those are the parts that are in the dirt. My little trick for cooking is we want to clean up as we cook, so I'm going to throw away garbage as I'm moving along here. And then we're going to chop up our onion. So I always like to cut it in half a little bit to make it a little bit smaller and easier to handle. And then we're going to make sure we keep our fingers out of the way of the blade and chop it nice and finely. And that way it'll just like melt into the meat and you won't really notice it as much. It just adds flavor at this point. You want to make sure your knuckles are curled and your fingertips are in. If you need to, you can guide the knife on your knuckle, but not with your fingers. So after we chop up our onion, we're going to want to turn on our burner. That way the pan gets nice and hot for later. After doing that, we want to add in our oil. Heat up the oil first before we throw in the onions. You want to make sure that's hot, so cooking is faster. To make sure your oil is hot, you want to move your pan around, and when it runs really fast around the pan, you know your oil will be really hot. So after you know it's hot, add in our onions to start cooking those. You always want to cook vegetables first because they take a little bit more time than your meats will. And like I said, we're going to clean while we cook, so I'm going to go and rinse off the cutting board so we can use it for later, and then I'm going to go put this knife by the sink, not hidden in the water, that way no one cuts themselves when reaching it. So the next step is going to be to grate up our cheese. So we got to, of course, open up the package of cheese. And then to grate it, a lot of people like to stand up the grater like this, but I don't like to do that because it's a little bit harder. Your cheese will tend to break. You don't get as much force on it. You're not as in control. So my little tip is to lay it down flat like this. You can use a little bit of body weight into it. It's easier to control. It doesn't like to tip. But we want to make sure we stir our onions. That way nothing burns. We don't want burnt food when we eat. And then, of course, we're going to show off the puppy because dogs are cute. And like I said, you're going to see a lot clean up as we cook. So I'm just going to bag up the cheese, put it in the fridge, save it for later for a different meal. Just going to put the ground beef in the pan, start cooking that. But you can use chicken, pork, whatever type of meat you want. I just chose to use ground beef for this example. And again, just throwing away trash and putting dishes in the sink as we move on. Keep the workspace clean, makes it easier. As you can see here, always make sure you have a dog in the kitchen because they can always clean up scraps on the floor as needed. They're really good for that. But now we're just going to chop up our ground beef, make sure it's nice and broken up. We don't want a brick of meat in our tacos, so I'm going to break it up and brown it up. As it's browning, we're going to always add salt and pepper. You always want to just add salt and pepper to your meat, adds flavor, and you don't want bland meat, so you always got to add something, so always season your meat. I'm going to try and get the dog out of the kitchen now after he ate. Now we're going to grab another pan for later, and you will see why in a little bit. But as we wait for that pan to heat up, we're going to grab a plate for when we serve up our tacos. This makes it easier, saving steps for later, just using our time wisely. So we're going to add some seasoning to our meat now, the actual taco seasoning itself. I got this one from Costco, but you can get any single one you want, use your preference. I never measure, I just eyeball, but you do what you want to do. We add a little bit of water to help simmer the meat down, and then it helps mix the seasoning along with each little bit of meat. Then we're going to cover it, and that way it can just simmer for a little bit, and it helps thicken up the meat. Because you don't just want watery meat for tacos, so we're going to want to thicken it up. So in this pan, we're gonna actually like fry our shells to make them a little puffy. So we're gonna add a good amount of oil so it covers the pan. Make sure it gets nice and hot. And then once we know it's hot, we're gonna throw in a shell. And it's gonna start to fry up a little bit and almost puff up. I wanna make sure we grab some tongs to flip it. Makes it a little bit easier. You don't wanna use metal or anything on the pan, it'll scratch it up. As you can see, it puffed up in there, and that's how you know it's really hot. And then you flip it, and it puffs up again. And this just helps make like chewier tacos with a little bit of crunch. Just a different flavor. So now we're going to remove the lid to the meat, start stirring it up and turn off the heat. I'm going to take it off the heat so the cooking slows down. And now it's time to plate. We're going to just fold up our shells and make sure they're easy and accessible for later. And I like to just lay them out easier like this in this pattern. It makes it for easy plating and serving. We're going to open up the first one, just put in the meat. Put in a generous amount, but it's always to your liking. Put it for all the 4. And then just fill them up with cheese. Again, you just add to what you like. And then after these just a few easy and quick steps, you'll have a nice, beautiful taco meal.